y'all, it's Kay from the Literary Apothecary and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be doing my June wrap up, my July TBR. We're going to talk about all the things that I've been reading and the things that I am looking forward to reading in July. But first, some stats about my reading in June. Now, this is just to give you an idea of things that I've been reading, genres that I've been reading, and the ratings that I've been giving them. I've read 6 books, 1 short story, 1 essay, and 1 beta read. This was a 4-star month for me. I had 2 4.5 stars, 4 4 stars, and 1 3.5 star read. One of these came from the 1800s. One was originally published in 1994. One was published in 2015. 2 were published in both 2022 and 2023, and 1, my beta read, is still to be published. 5 of these books were fantasy, 1 was classic, 1 was historical fiction, and 1, my beta read, was like a YA fantasy. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what I've been reading. A lot of fantasy, but a little bit of other things too. I'm looking forward to incorporating some more genres in my future reading and hopefully diversify this a little bit more. So let's talk about what I did read in June. Just like always, I'll give a quick synopsis of what I thought about the particular read that I was talking about, the ratings, if I rated it, what I gave it, and if I have a non-spoiler quote from it that I think sums up the book or something about the book, I will include that in there also. Going in the order of how I finished it during the month of June, no particular order other than just finishing the books in reads. First up is B is for Bigfoot by Jim Butcher. This was my short story for the month. This was a Dresden Files short story. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. If you rate short stories, I don't know. I am like a habit of creature and I rate just about everything, but I absolutely loved B is for Bigfoot. I loved that we got explanations of things which are to come in the future of this series that I haven't gotten to yet, but I'm told by Leslie will explain things that I read in the future. I love that. So it's kind of like a sneak peek at what's to come in the Dresden Files. And I loved that friendship between Harry and Erwin. I can't wait for more of that, which I think is coming in a later book. Next up, I finished Dictator by Robert Harris. This is book 3 in the Cicero trilogy. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. This one felt different than the first 2 for me. Had a little bit of a slower start, less drama at the beginning, and just a slower pace in general throughout the book. The audiobook narrator, however, David Rintoul, was absolutely fantastic. I loved the passion and enthusiasm that he had when he was reading Cicero's speeches. You have to have that when you're reading speeches like the ones that Cicero did, because Cicero was like the mic drop guy of ancient Rome. He had so many moments that were zingers and just absolutely fantastic, that you need passion and enthusiasm whenever you're reading his speeches out loud. Next up, we have No Heart for a Thief by James Lloyd Doolin. This is book 1 in the Malatu trilogy. This was one of my self-pub Sunday books. This one was originally a 4-star, but after talking to Doolin about one of my concerns, I bumped it up to 4.5 stars, which doesn't always happen, and was not the intention that he had when we were talking. It just happened. In No Heart for a Thief, you have good characters, but I had a slight issue with the main character, which is why it's 4.5 and not 5 stars. I wanted more from him that I was told by Doolin we're gonna get throughout the trilogy. So his character arc was less of a book arc, more of a trilogy arc, which is what made me bump it up to 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was a slow but beautiful prose, so it's a book that you'll want to take your time with. don't try to rush through it, or else you're going to miss a lot of the most important and beautiful moments in this book. I actually have 2 quotes from this book because I don't have a lot of quotes in this monthly wrap-up. The first quote says, "Trauma changed a person in ways varied and unpredictable, but it always settled in the eyes," which is so true. You can see trauma in the eyes more than anywhere else in the body. And then the second quote, "In the hands of a ruthless person, skillful words could be more powerful than 100 blades." And those just give you an idea of James Lloyd Doolin's writing in No Heart for a Thief. I can't wait for the rest of this trilogy. I hope he's writing it right now because I am dying for book 2 to see where it takes us. If you missed our live show for Self-Pub Sundays, I will link that in the description below. Next up, we have The White Album by Joan Didion. This is the essay by Joan Didion of that title, not the book. We're reading the book collection right now, but this is particularly the essay from that collection. This was a hard essay for me to read. Didion was trying to make sense out of a whole lot of nonsense in her life and the world at time, and she was kind of trying to write through this all, and it's hard to process it all coming through while she's trying to process it while she's writing. But it did give me one of my all-time favorite quotes, and the quote of the title of this entire collection of essays, the collection of collections that we're working our way through very slowly once a month. The quote says, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live. We live entirely, especially if we are writers, by the imposition of a narrative line upon disparate images, by the ideas with which we have learned to freeze the shifting phantasmagorical which is our actual experience." And that just gives you an idea of Joan Didion's writing style. It's very literary, but it just hits you, at least it hits me, straight at the heart. And phantasmagorical, I'm sure I'm saying that word completely wrong, but that's one of my new favorite words. I love it so much. Next up, we have The Revenge of Thousands by Michael Roberti. This is the prequel novella in the Crown and Tide series. This one I gave 4 out of 5 stars. It's a true novella length, which I was very appreciative of, but I thought maybe was it too short? It gave us a great introduction to the characters. It was kind of like a sampling of what we'll get in the future book. The magic system is one of the coolest magic systems I've ever seen. Basically, a person's handwriting disappears when the person dies. So a person dies and everything that they had ever written by hand disappears. And that to me is so cool, and it gives me goosebumps. I have a quote from this. The quote says, "When it was time to write down all of his heroic deeds, he would make sure it only hit the highlights." And that just gives you a little glimpse of the humor that Michael Roberti includes in these dark books. And I will talk a little bit more about The Revenge of Thousands once I get to book 1 in this series, because I have further to say about that, but let me include that in my comments for The Traitors We Are. Next up, I finished Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan. This is, of course, book 6 in the Wheel of Time series. This one I gave 3.5 out of 5 stars. Not a whole lot happens here. Most of the same from the other books we get. Kind of boring for me. The ending felt a bit flat compared to some of the other endings. Next up, I mentioned this earlier, The Traitors We Are by Michael Roberti. This is the book 1 in Crown and Tide series. And this is the first one he wrote. So he wrote The Revenge of Thousands after he wrote The Traitors We Are. I gave this one also 4 out of 5 stars. It had great storytelling, good plot, and the pacing was great. Good characters. It was like almost the perfect foreshadowing in this, because I had a feeling that certain things would happen to certain characters, but I had no idea how or when they happened, and I was still completely surprised when they did. Now, I want to link back to the Revenge of Thousands because there's two things I want to say about so far this series that I've read. First of all, reading The Revenge of Thousands, there's a huge improvement in writing from Mike Roberti in this novella. You can see the development of his writing in this, and I love being able to see where a writer improves from his writing from book to book. It just feels like a better book. Also, so for me, I am not necessarily a character-driven reader, but I need that connection, that emotional connection to characters when I'm reading them. And this I got from The Revenge of Thousands, which helped me connect to characters further in The Traitors We Are. I feel like because I read The Revenge of Thousands first, I got that connection. If I didn't read it first, I wouldn't have gotten quite so much of a connection in The Traitors We Are. So if you are like me and you need that connection, I recommend reading The Revenge of Thousands first. I think it's less than 150 pages, so it's a very quick read. But if you don't need that connection to readers, then feel free to start with The Traitors We Are. That's just my personal recommendation. Everyone has different thoughts about when to read the prequel novella, but that's my thoughts. Next up, we have The Voyage of the Forgotten by Nick Martell. This is book 3 in the Legacy of the Mercenary Kings trilogy, the final book in that trilogy. I will have a series review coming for that soon. This one I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This one was very different than the first 2 books. At least that's the way it felt for me. Our chapter numbers went backwards as you went through the book, which took a lot of adjustment for me. There were so many reveals at the end that I felt like there has to be some kind of a spin-off series coming from this. Maybe not so in the same points of views, maybe in different points of views, but in that same universe, that same world. It was an ending. It wasn't open-ended, but it was open enough that there is more coming. And this one I have 2 quotes also. The world needs a villain to reset it, so I am here to play the role with a smile and a bow. And that is like the summation of this series as a whole. You don't know who to root for in this series. Everyone is essentially a villain and everyone is a hero, and that's one of the things that I love most about this series. And then the second quote, our legacy is unimportant compared to how much we are loved. And if you've read this series, you know what character is saying this quote, and you can see the growth and the development of this character throughout the series. This quote is important to one particular character the most. And if you've read the series, you know exactly who I'm talking about. And then the last book that I finished reading in June is Middlemarch by George Eliot. Y'all have heard me talk about this book so much because I've been reading this since April and I finally finished it. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. It had incredible characters, but there were a lot. And they were very active characters. They were always doing things in different places at different times with different people, and it was hard to keep track of who was doing what, where, why, when, who, with who, especially at the beginning. And here I'm going to use the word world building. We don't often use this when we're talking about things outside of fantasy or science fiction, but I feel like George Eliot used world building here so well. This little community of Middlemarch felt huge to me. And I felt like when I was writing my written review for this, what kept coming to my mind was kind of a merge of Jane Austen's Regency writing with kind of the twists and turns and craziness of a Dostoevsky book. I feel like those two merged together, you would get Middlemarch. I have one quote for you. This is a quote that made me laugh because I know exactly what it's talking about. But by the end of Mr. Brooks' pen was a thinking organ, evolving sentences, especially of a benevolent kind, before the rest of his mind could well overtake them. And if you're a writer and you are the type of writer that just the characters take over the story just writes itself, you know exactly what that quote is talking about. So let's talk about my carryovers, the books that I didn't quite finish in June, so will be carried over into July. We have A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. Now, I just finished that book last night, but when I was planning this video, I hadn't finished it yet. So this book so far was a 5-star read, and spoiler alert, it holds up. You get this spooky, magical mystery in this book. The atmosphere is absolutely fantastic. The characters are great, and I loved everything about this book. I can't wait to do my review because I need to talk about this book. A Feast for Crows by George R. R. Martin. This is book 4 in the Song of Ice and Fire series. So far, this is a 4-star read for me, but I am enjoying the other points of views that we didn't get in previous books. We're getting some more of those kinds of side characters, and y'all know how much I love the side characters. I Can't Make This Up by Kevin Hart. This is a reread for me, 5 stars still. This I'm doing a buddy read / listen with John. We're listening to the audiobook narrated by Kevin Hart himself, and I am loving it just as much as the first time. Equal Rights by Terry Pratchett. So far, this is a 4-star read for me. It's good, but not amazing. This was one of his earlier Discworld books, and so you can kind of see that in the prose. It's not quite top Terry Pratchett prose, but it's still Terry Pratchett, so it's still really good. And then Unmasking Autism, which is a book that I had a library loan that ran out, so now I've got to wait for that library loan to come back. So far, it's sitting at a 4-star for me. And then my July TBR will include too many books as normal. This was supposed to be a pared down TBR, and then it kind of exploded. So I'm going to quickly talk about these books that I have in my July TBR, and I'm sure there's probably books that I have missed on here that should be on here, but yeah, it is what it is, I guess. First up is our Joan Didion Essay of the Month. That's James Pike American. I am going to read that this evening after I get this video edited and posted for you all. Then we have A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan, book 7 in the Wheel of Time series. I actually started that one this morning, and so far I am enjoying this one more than book 6. The Altar of My Fate by Michael Schuthless. I am sure I'm saying his name wrong, but he will correct me once we have our Self Pub Sunday episode coming up later this month. 11th Cycle by Kian Ardlin. This is another book for Self Pub Sunday, and I've heard such fantastic things about this. Everyone is loving this book. It's this grim, dark book. You guys know I've been reading a lot of dark books lately, which is unusual for me, but I mean, John Palladino has turned me into a grimdark fan, so might as well just embrace it. We've got A Dance with Dragons by George R. R. Martin. This is the final book in A Song of Ice and Fire series. I know there's supposed to be, like 1 or 2 more in this series, but it's taken him forever to write them, and there are some people that don't think he's ever going to finish this series. So I feel confident in saying that this is the final book in that series, at least so far. Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett. This continues my Discworld and my Witches series journey, and I am really excited to read this because I know Derry at Derry's read it before, absolutely loves Weird Sisters and the Witches series as a whole, so I can't wait to dive into that. A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians by H.G. Perry. This is my patron pick of the month, picked by Fine at Fine Reads. Fine was one of my very, very first patrons, and she's been there ever since, and I love her to pieces. Deathless Beast by Andrew Meredith. This is going to be a buddy read with Leslie. I've basically got an Andrew Meredith book on my TBR for the next several months. He's going to be coming up in, I think it's September for Self Pub Sunday, but, you know, might as well just read them all while you're at it. Grave Peril by Jim Butcher. I really need to catch up on the Dresden series, and I can't wait. I've also got the arc for Labyrinth's Heart by M.A. Carrick. This is the final book in the Rook and Rose series, and y'all know how much I'm dying to read this. I'm hoping to get this in July, but it doesn't release until August, so it might get pushed to the beginning of August. And then I have another book I can't tell you about right now because it's for a secret project that I'm working on, which might also get pushed to August if we're being honest, because this is a big TBR, and the last week in July I'm going to be gone at a conference for work, so I won't be able to get a lot of reading in then, but I'm hoping because I don't have school this month, I will be able to get through at least most of this TBR. So that is my June wrap up, my July TBR. Let me know in the comments below what was your favorite read in June. What are you looking forward to reading the most in July? If you've read any of the books that I've talked about here, let me know in the comments below what you thought. If you've read any of my July TBR books, let me know in the comments below which ones I should prioritize over others. As always, my Patreon and my Discord information will be in the description below. Keep reading, and I love you all to the moon and back. Bye.